morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to another webinar by DataPlatformGeeks. My name is Rohit, and I will be your host for today. Today's session is on Introduction to Azure Security by Adin Ermie, who is an MVP from Canada. And Ramesh will be helping us with the moderation of today's webinar. So eDominus Systems, a lot of you already know about eDominus Systems and its popular brands. We have the SQLMaestros, which is into a lot of training on Microsoft data stack and SQL Server. We have the master classes going on right now, and we have 3 more master classes to go by Satya Ramesh and Amit Bansal. So Satya will be putting out the link for the master class, and you can register if you haven't already. We have the learning kits, the video courses, and HOS, which I'll be talking about later. We have Peopleware in India, where we do a lot of corporate training, and of course our popular ERP product that is called Expand SM ERP. And DataPlatformGeeks, our community of which you all are a part of, including the 250,000 members. We have a lot of free webinars and in-person events that we do throughout India and throughout the nation. We have 4 summits. We have previously done 4 summits under it, that is SQL Server Geeks Annual Summit 15, 16, and Data Platform Summit 17, 18. We have recently launched DPS 2019 on Feb 2 at our in-person event in Bangalore. So this is our logo and the theme for DPS 2019, Empowering Data and AI Transformation. It will be a 3-day conference, the regular conference on 22, 23, and 24, and we have 18 pre-cons spread across 3 days, that is on 19th, 20th, and 21st. And it will be happening at Radisson Blu, which is in Bangalore. This is a picture from the last year, that is DPS 2018. We had more than 1,000 people participating from 250 companies and 16 countries. On the stage, you can see Rohan Kumar, the Azure Data Group Corporate Vice President, and the entire Redmond team. Like I mentioned, we will have a 3-day regular conference on August 22, 23, 24, and 18 pre-cons spread across August 19, 20th, and 21st. We will have 100+ sessions on the regular conference days, which will be delivered by 50+ speakers. And of course, one of the major attractions of the conference is that it is 100% learning and 0% marketing. You can visit our website, that is dps10.com. Satya will be putting it down. And if you have any queries, you can write to contact@dps10.com. So here you can start booking your seats right away. We have in fact provided the pre-registered people their discount code. So please do use that while registering if you had pre-registered. If your company is looking to participate, and if you want the DPS team to invite your company, so do click on would you like the DPS team to invite your company, and we will reach out to you. So why should you really care about the conference? First of all, it's about the deep technical content by which is being delivered by the world's best MCMs, MVPs, the Microsoft Redmond team, and Microsoft team members from all over the world. And also, if you are really considerate about reskilling and upskilling, this is the place for you. This conference also gives an opportunity for you to learn from some of the world's best and make connections for life. And of course, it is happening at the world's best infrastructure, that is at Radisson Blu. And DPS involves the community. So what does that really mean? Our community being you, vote for the sessions that you want to learn at the summit. So every session that you see up there at the summit is being voted by the community. And yes, of course, we have highly curated content and a disciplined execution. The next steps would be evaluate DPS. Our previous conferences content is all up there on our websites. So visit dps10.com and register yourselves right away. And please do remember the price increases on the 1st of every month. So right now in February, the launch price is going on, and in the coming months, it is going to increase. This is the DPG core team. Amit Bansal, the founder and president. We have Manohar Puna, who is the vice president. Manish Panchal, Vijay Mishra, Vijay Reddy, Sandeep Pani, Prince Rastogi, Surbhi Agarwal, Sakharam Shinde, and Devdatta Nath, who are our regional mentors from throughout India. These are the eDominus teams from Bangalore and Kolkata who support us in all our events. This was in our previous conference at DPS 2018. You can see Amit Bansal, the eDominus team, and the DPG team on the stage. Special thanks to Microsoft, of course, for supporting us in our community initiatives. So why join DPG? You all are members of Data Platform Geeks. So please go ahead and access all the free resources that we have put up there, including the previous webinars, the in-person events, everything that speaker has shared with us, the free videos that we upload. So do not forget to check them out. And of course, we have come up with a new meetup model. So with the new meetup model, now with our help, you can organize in-person events in your own organization. So do write to us. It'll also be an opportunity for you to be the regional mentor with Data Platform Geeks. So fill out the form, the regional mentor form that is on our website, and do write to us, and we will get back to you. If you have any questions beyond this webinar, you can write to our community on Facebook, LinkedIn, and on our Telegram group on mobile. All our webinars are recorded, of course, and every webinar is uploaded once the webinar is done. So for that, you can visit youtube.com/SQLServerGeeks, or we also upload free SQL videos that is done by our eDominer team. So you can watch all of them at youtube.com/SQLMaestros. So without any further delay, let's get started with the webinar. Over to you, Adin.
Thank you. So let me just switch to share. And I will rotate this. Okay, and so if you can just confirm that everyone can see the screen.
Yes, Adin, we can see the screen.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Today we're going to talk about an introduction to Microsoft Azure security. In this perspective, we're going to talk mostly in the aspect of IT operations. I know this is a data platform specific group, but some of it will also be directly relatable to the data platform itself and how different tool sets and different components interrelate to each other, and how that kind of brings together a better Azure security story to understand how what we do in various aspects and roles of our professional lives relate to each other and how we can help each other out. So first of all, I just want to give a shout out to say thanks to the hosts to have me on to speak to your group today. Appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity in the future as well to discuss many other topics. So just briefly, a little bit about myself. I'm a manager in Avanad's cloud infrastructure consulting practice. I operate as a solution architect specific to Azure, specializing in different elements of the platform, like infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, management and security technology spaces, governance, and BCDR, so business continuity and disaster recovery. I'm also a 4-time Microsoft MVP in cloud and data center management. So not just Azure specifically, but in a hybrid aspect for data center technologies and connecting that up to Azure and working in that capacity as well. My contact information is here on the screen for anyone that wants to reach out either through email, excuse me, or Twitter. Connect with me on LinkedIn or check out my blog. I do have a lot of people that will reach out for either questions or if there's certain topics they'd like me to research and write about, that's fine as well. So do feel free to connect, and I'll do my best to help you out as much as I can. So when we're talking about security, what do we think about when we hear that word, security? Because security can apply to many different areas of technology, of life. As depicted on the screen, we have identity and access, which might be the first thing we might think about initially. How we can be authorized to access certain information, access to various accounts, and so forth. Data encryption is very common and a very hot topic around the world, especially when there's conversations of breaches or changes in laws like the GDPR in Europe and things like that. So that's usually a big focus as well when the topic of security is discussed. But even with data encryption, we have to think about it from not only being at rest, but also while data is in transit and in use. How can we apply encryption to apply a level of security there? With infrastructure to protect our environments, this is not just, say, our virtual machines that we have running, but also the physical hosts that are running those systems as well. We need to have protection at different layers or different levels. With network levels, we think about, traditionally speaking, firewalls, threat intelligence, data loss prevention, breaches and data exfiltration. How do we detect that? How do we mitigate that? And more importantly, how do we prevent that from happening ultimately? Because we don't want our organizations to be in the news for a bad reason in that context. And even things on here that's not mentioned, like mobility. We think of our cell phones, we think of tablets and IoT devices. With the explosion in these mobility data points, we have to consider security at all different levels. So the problem or the challenge is that security is a large and vague topic. When someone says, okay, I want to talk about security, they could be talking about any number of different technologies and features and approaches, right? It can cover a long list, and you need to be able to focus on maybe one or two pieces, or to understand the context that the customer, the user, the business is coming from. And as was mentioned, these technologies don't just span, say, the cloud in general or Azure specifically, but they also include hybrid options, and not just hybrid between the Azure data center and our own on-prem data center, but hybrid across cloud providers as well. Can some of these technologies be leveraged to add layers of security and protection for, say, AWS resources or GCP resources or Alibaba and so forth? And though traditionally speaking, security is considered from an IT operations or IT pro perspective, we also want to think about the perspective of the developer. So when they're writing the code for services and applications, what can they do at that level as well to ensure security is effectively baked in from the ground up? So we need to think about fundamentals, right? We need to think about being secure by design. So in our services, in our applications and features, whether we're delivering those internal to business units inside our organization, or whether we're maybe designing something for external use and consumption, how do we want to control who has access to what information? How are we going to authenticate and authorize someone to access certain areas of data, certain features, and so forth? And a big part of that comes in is around that data classification point, right? What is the sensitivity of the data that is stored in the database that users could potentially access? What requirements, again, for the legal perspective, like GDPR and other acts, other rules and controls like that, what do we have to keep in mind when we're designing the system to adhere to that? Because if we're designing it today, we don't know what the laws of tomorrow will be. So we need to ensure that we do the best that we can from the ground up by design at the start, and also provide ourselves flexibility to be able to adapt and adjust as we may need to in our either in our organization, in our industry, in our specific geography as well. When it comes to the development side on the code, how are certain secure elements of code protected? A great example is that secret management point. In the past, it was sometimes included in the code files themselves, the authentication strings and authentication keys to access, say, the database, for example. And so in that context, there was an area that needed to be more tightly controlled and protected from malicious attackers. So the best practice is not to include connection strings or certain passphrases and codes and components within configuration files within our application code, but being able to offload that to a tool that is specifically designed to protect that information, but also ease its accessibility from a developer standpoint, so that all they have to do is reference a specific key effectively to be able to utilize that within the application's operations without needing to actually know what that key is. And the power behind that would allow the security team, operations team to be able to rotate keys, certificates, and things of that nature, while not breaking the application because it's not hard-coded to a specific, say, credential or access component. So that also kind of ties in with the code quality and overlaps a little bit on the security. We may be familiar with the terms of DevOps, so development and operations, but a modification on that is DevSecOps, so development, security, and operations. And all three really need to kind of come down at the starting point to ensure security is baked in from that ground up, from the design and from the code level at the beginning. So that's where code quality, code checks come in, unit testing against this to ensure not only does the code operate as the developers have written and expected to do, but also from a security operations standpoint, are they vetting it against what it's calling? How is that communication encrypted? How is that data being consumed? And so forth. When we move up further into the environment itself, now that it's been built, it's been designed, and it's been developed, we need to add yet another layer of security on top of that, right? Our environments. How do we control access after the applications have been deployed? So in Azure, there's a component called ARM, so Azure Resource Manager, and RBAC stands for Role-Based Access Control, and this allows more granularity on who is allowed to access what information, who's allowed to access what resources within the specific environment itself, even to the point of who's even allowed to see what resources actually exist. So on the networking component, we mentioned things like threat detection and analysis and brute force attacks, which we'll get into a little bit more detail later on. But you don't necessarily want to expose certain teams or certain individuals within the organization to be able to see what security type controls you have in place around, say, the network or the operating system with security hardening to certain specific standards, or what type and level of encryption are you applying in the environment, right? So there's different layers of security within an environment itself that go beyond just how it's designed and how it's coded, but also day two type operations in the environment itself. And so finally, we have the security operations point where we want to collect data around what's happening. We want to audit who is accessing what. We want to know Is our security controls adding maybe a layer of performance issues possibly? Is there an area for refinement or improvement to not impact, say, end user performance and experience, but still adhering to security and audit controls, again, either within our organization, within our specific industry vertical, or within our geography specific needs? And so that's also where some of that RBAC model comes into play with our access controls and also disaster recovery. Even though disaster recovery is not traditionally a security component, it is related to it because we will need to secure our environment against disaster, right? So whether that means we have a backup, so we're securing against, say, data corruption, or if we think about not only the brute force, but the ransomware, malware type of approach, where if someone is able to get into our environment and all of our systems are encrypted, do we have a backup that's protected from that? And that's an interesting point because there's been examples where when ransomware is applied to an environment, the malicious party is getting more and more advanced, where they would go and change the backup policy on the targeted system. So instead of, say, let's say taking a backup every day or every week and keeping that for 7 days, let's say, they would write the code that would go and change the backup policy so that it would say take a backup every minute or every 30 minutes. And the reason why they did that is so that when it got to a certain number of backups, all of the historical backups would then be effectively dumped or wiped out, because now you have a lot more to feed through, and all of the current backups will still be encrypted by the ransomware. So again, not directly related to security, but it still ties in quite closely around, we want to protect our systems by following this approach, but we also have to account for, if we are in a situation where our environment is compromised, how do we recover from that security issue, whether it's encryption through ransomware, whether it's corrupted, accidental deletion, things of that nature, that we want to ensure we also consider disaster recovery as part of the fundamental component that we need to include in design, in the code, how the application handles that, the environment, and how operations is able to react to that. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to predominantly look at the security perspective from the IT operation side. So identity, data, network, and resources. There is another component to this on the developer side, which a coworker of mine has a presentation on, which we can discuss at a later point. But my perspective that I bring is on the IT operations, or the IT pro element of this. So we're going to talk about Azure Security Center and the features within that, and how that applies to our environment, again, not only just in the cloud, in Azure, but in a hybrid space, and some of those features and services within there, how those can be used to secure our resources at different levels and different components. So as we know, hybrid cloud is the growing approach for many organizations in the world today. And because a hybrid cloud strategy brings in a new paradigm, a new focus and shift in how we approach security, because it's not just our traditional data center that we have that we're operating, but now it's hybrid. So it's partly in the cloud and partly in our own control, or in our own data centers. This means we need to take a new approach to security, because our infrastructure is distributed across different locations or even different clouds. So we could be using some servers in our data center. We could be using some infrastructure in the cloud like in Azure, but also in other clouds like AWS, GCP, Alibaba, and so forth. So that is a shift from what we've traditionally had to deal with in our own data centers to date. And so we need to understand how does that affect our approach excuse me, to security. Because the cloud empowers us to have faster and faster change, right? Think about things like the invent of artificial intelligence or machine learning or quantum computing, right? These technologies continue to push the boundaries of how fast we advance in different technologies, how fast we can use these high-level computing systems to achieve more, to achieve something different, to give us a competitive edge and so forth. But these advances in technology also increases the sophistication of the threats we're exposed to, because in reality, the malicious actors also have access to these technologies as well. So it kind of goes back and forth where, excuse me, where they have access to advanced technologies, and so do we. So how do we protect ourselves in an ever-changing world and with ever-changing approaches and tactics around security or breaching of security? So with Security Center, the first element that we get is having a unified control plane to be able to see what's happening across our entire landscape and all our workloads, right? So when we choose to use the cloud, the responsibility of security actually becomes shared between us as the consumer and the cloud provider. So whether that's a partnership between our organization and Microsoft or Amazon or Google. And with that, we have a comprehensive set of different security tools and controls and capabilities that are available to us to help us unify all these disconnected systems, all these systems in different areas, so that we have one place to stop and understand our security baseline, our compliance, and so forth. So through Azure Security Center, we are empowered to protect our hybrid clouds. So we want to emphasize on hybrid, right? Like we mentioned, it's not just on-prem and it's not just Azure. It's across different workload types. It's across infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. It's across different clouds. And so we want to see the power between Azure Security Center to operate against a hybrid space. And we also have adaptive threat prevention. And this is actually very important to emphasize that it's not just a reaction, right? It's being preventative, having a prevention, being proactive against the threats that can occur. And then finally, we have intelligent detection and response. So we want to be able to, say, lessen the number of flooded alerts when something happens, to kind of correlate those collectively into one specific security incident, so that we have one area to focus on and not 100 different alerts that we need to understand which one we need to start on first. So we're going to go into each of these areas individually and kind of dive a little bit more deeper into the feature set around security in the cloud for each of these. And then closer to the end, we'll go into the Azure portal to show some of these live and also to share some real world experiences and points to take home. So the first section we're talking about is that unified visibility and control, right? We want to know what we have out there. We need to manage the security across our different workloads, again, depending on where they may be running, whether it's our data center or in the cloud or different clouds and so forth. So the first point is that we want to understand what state of security are we in. Regardless of where our workloads are running, how secure are we? And where can we improve to reach a higher level of security? So the nice thing about Azure Security Center specifically is that it's built into the Azure platform. There's no setup required. It's not that you need to deploy another server and deploy a database and install some security software and connect that up and all that stuff. It's built in natively as a PaaS or SaaS type solution that we can automatically integrate with and hook into for our resources. And with Azure Security Center, for any resources that we have running in Azure specifically, it can automatically discover and monitor the security of our Azure resources. So with a few configuration options, which we can show, we can say any virtual machine we have in Azure, I want to automatically onboard that into Azure Security Center so that I can very easily see across my landscape what our compliance is, what our security score is, if there's any recommendations to improve this, and most importantly, if there's any threats that happen against those resources. So it makes it really easy to onboard existing resources in Azure, but even in other clouds and on premises. It does require an agent, of course, as most security tool sets do, but it's not overly intrusive to be able to put that in because the agent can serve a multi-purpose depending on what we're wanting to leverage. So with compliance, we get an enhanced feature actually around controlling the policy that the Security Center tool set applies and checks against. So we see even in the screenshot an example of some of the security policies in place, auditing if something is present or not. That's what the audit if not exists reference means. So auditing if there's any endpoint protection, right, like threat detection. If we're getting any system updates, if we're not patching, disk encryption, and so forth. So even if we're not sure if we want to turn something on with the way it may affect an existing production environment, we can enable it for an auditing perspective so that it can go and see and say, okay, if you were to turn this on, here's all the systems that maybe are missing this type of configuration or are not up to a certain level in the security aspect based on these default kind of checks. But we're able to customize that as well. So these policies that Microsoft's produced are out of the box, and they can apply to multiple subscriptions within Azure. So if you're a large organization or enterprise, you may have multiple subscriptions. You might have management groups that you group those subscriptions under. And it's not like you have to define these policies for each and every subscription, right? As long as it's a part of the same Azure AD tenant, then you're able to apply it universally, so to speak, so that the configurations that it's checking for and the customizations that you make to these policies will be applied across the entire landscape, and you don't have to, say, copy and paste effectively the same security rules across many and multiple subscriptions. Security Center itself also integrates in with a feature called Azure Log Analytics, which is part of the Azure Monitor platform. And this is where the security logs that are collected are correlated and stored that allow you to have additional insight into what's happening, and it's more lower level as part of, say, an investigation on a security breach or an incident, so that you're able to get the lower level details of logs of what's happened against the environment or against a specific resource. So there's a very tight integration between this, and what log analytics gives us is a lot of deeper insights based on the machine learning and AI solutions that are wrapped around that feature. So Another nice point with log analytics is you're able to take all of this data, all this security data, and out of the box, we have security solutions that provide dashboards, and queries and some UI to be able to visualize different elements of security in the environment. But we're able to customize that. We're able to either modify the existing queries that are used for these solutions or create our very own. So perhaps your security team wants to specifically see certain type of events against certain specific systems, or make a specialized security-based dashboard per application, then you're able to do that. You write the query to filter out on what information you want to see, how you want to summarize that information in percentiles and counts, how you want that rendered in charts and graphs, and you're able to create a custom solution that's specific to your organization, your department, your business specific needs. So there's lots of really great examples that are available to start to help you kind of get started with the queries. There's a lot of really good resources on learning how to write the query language to make it really more powerful to use. And what's really interesting about the query language itself is because log analytics is also part of the Azure Monitor platform, there's additional feature sets around using machine learning and AI to extract different components of the data. So I've seen examples of queries where by adding a single line into the query itself, you're able to pipe the results into a machine learning algorithm and automatically identify things like data pattern differences and data pattern similarities just by adding a single line. So it's that powerful. And finally, in this section specifically, we want to analyze our security information from more than one resource, right? We don't necessarily have only one channel of secure data. We want to ingest data from multiple areas because that helps us get a better view across the landscape as a whole, and not say just the specific server or VM that we're investigating. So things like firewall solutions and networking components and anti-malware solutions. We want to integrate, even with third-party tool sets, integrate those security logs into Azure Security Center so that we have that one pane of glass, we have that one unified spot to go and review the logs, to correlate data across different systems to understand what's happened. So further to that, when we're leveraging Active Directory, specifically Azure Active Directory, there's other Microsoft security tools in the cloud, of course, the AD information protection, threat analytics, and other solutions as well that can integrate further into Security Center. So it's not that Security Center is replacing them, but think of it as the central security log store across all these different tool sets and technologies and features so that we have one place to go. We can graph and chart things, we can report on data, and then leveraging the AI and machine learning Microsoft builds into that platform, it can correlate and identify even further patterns, malicious actors, and so forth. And so if there's any third-party solutions that also support the common event format, SEF format as well for log export, that can very easily be integrated into Security Center, as well as SIM security event solutions as well. So now we're going to talk about adaptive threat prevention, right? So if you remember, we talked about we don't want to just react, we want to be proactive. We want to prevent, because the security landscape is always changing, and we need to be able to, as much as possible, be ahead of that and react to that quickly to prevent security breaches within our environment, brute force attacks, and most importantly, data exfiltration. So we want to be able to action things quickly We want to identify risks and, most importantly, mitigate those risks to minimize our exposure when there's something new in the environment or in the wild. So we think about, especially with the ransomware, when that came out not that long ago, and many organizations were affected by that because of a missing patch. Being able to prevent that and identify that when something is like that is detected, the security teams in Microsoft, as well as in partnership with third-party security firms all over the world, work together to identify the pattern for those types of threats and ensure that's immediately put into the Security Center tool set and pattern recognition to help prevent that from happening at a larger scale, and to help organizations be able to react very quickly to protect themselves. So we want to identify and remediate any vulnerabilities we have, and we want to do so quickly, right? So we need to not just scan our system once or scan our environment once, it's perpetual, it's ongoing. And with Security Center, we have a lot of built-in security assessments in the tool itself. We see, as an example in the screenshot, that it spans not only our virtual machines, our servers, our computers, but our PaaS level services, app services, and even containers as well. And so Microsoft is continuing to invest quite heavily in these built-in security assessments across all these different and new and emerging technologies so that we can assess the environment. We see we have a score specifically so that we know where we stand and where we might need to focus on and improve, and how to help us be in the best position possible. Now, not every security assessment solution is applicable maybe to our organization and environment, right? We might have some unique requirements or certain recommendations from Security Center that aren't really applicable. We can turn those off or on as needed, as well as creating and modifying our own through the policy mechanism. And so the challenge, of course, is when there's a vulnerability in an environment, we need to know what we need to focus on first, because of course, especially if there's a breach or a high sensitive issue, everything is priority one. And when you have multiple priority ones, how do you know which one you need to focus on? So at least with the secure impact score and the assessments and recommendations in the tool set, it helps us to see which areas we need to focus on more quickly and action right away. We can see obviously the things listed in red are more applicable or a higher security concern versus something that's a lower level that can be addressed a little bit later. Another really important fact that's really helpful on a security side is protecting our environment from brute force. So if we have anything that is deployed either on-prem or in Azure that is publicly exposed, maybe it's like a traditional kind of web server sitting in a DMZ or some other system that happens to have public internet access, then when we have something out there, it's only a matter of minutes before it's sniffed, it's scanned, and people try to brute force attack it in. Right? It's the world that we live in today. So the feature of just-in-time VM access is really powerful because it locks down the standard set of remote connectivity ports. And it's not just on like the Windows side, like RDP ports, but even on Linux, like SSH and so forth, where it can lock down those ports so that they're not open. But then there's an automated process that when someone does need to remotely connect legitimately to a VM for maybe for servicing or something like that nature, then you can open that port for a very short specific window, and even specifically just to their IP versus just opening it up to the world. So there's a lot of really great granular control here that we'll see that allows us to lock down access for anything that's publicly exposed, but then still not prevent operations or development or anyone else that might need to access the system upon, upon part of their operational job. And when you enable the just-in-time access and when someone requests access, those activities are logged in the audit logs of Azure. So it's not that someone can request access, enable it, and no one knows what's going on or what they're doing. That is an auditable action log that's being captured. Another really nice feature that's a little bit newer is this application control or adaptive application control. Because if something's exposed, or whether it's exposed or not, someone gets in our environment and we don't know that they're there for many days or weeks or months, and they put some malware on there, they open a back door and so forth, and we discover it later, that's obviously not what we want. But with the adaptive controls, Azure Security Center will monitor the pattern of use of the system in effect. It will understand what systems, what rules, what processes are occurring on that target system and provide a recommended whitelist. So basically, once we have our application configured and running for a little bit, and it can detect, okay, it's this directory we're always using, these processes are always happening, these are okay, expected normal behavior, we can turn on adaptive app controls, and it will prevent any other rogue processes or components from operating on that system. Because it's a lot harder to make a blacklist and say all of these aren't allowed, because you're going to perpetually have to update that basically all the time, because threats always change. But if you reverse it to an adaptive whitelist, it learns our application patterns. We tell it this is what's allowed to operate on these specific systems, and anything that doesn't fall into that, it will block from running. So this control is really powerful, especially if we have sensitive systems that we don't want compromised, which is of course everything, but especially if there's anything publicly exposed to the internet as well, like in that DMZ, so that we have a little bit more tight control if someone does breach our environment, that we have a little bit more of a lockdown on what processes we are allowing to operate there. So this feature, it takes a little bit for it to learn your application pattern. I forget the exact number of days, but it's not instant. It takes a little bit of time for it to understand and see the pattern. So if this is something you want to use, I'd suggest turning it on right away so that you have enough time for it to learn that pattern before, say, you move something into production. Okay, last section here is about our intelligent detection and response, right? So let's say we've taken all these precautions, we have all the security in place, but something does get through because, well, that's how it goes. So we need to detect when that happens. We need to be able to respond quickly and be able to do so intelligently. Like we mentioned, if you are breached, or if you're familiar with monitoring tools where you can get alert storms because something goes down and it's daisy chained or related to a lot of other systems, then your inbox or pager could be flooded with hundreds or thousands of emails or alerts of issues. And that does not help when we're trying to root cause what's happening, to stop anything that's maliciously occurring in the environment, like data exfiltration. So we need an intelligent component and not just an alerting system. So the intelligence built into the platform ties together a lot of different components to give us this advanced analytics behind it. It's not just an alerting engine. It has a lot of intelligence to either correlate data points together to simplify our approach, to help us do root cause analysis, to produce reports on what's happening on malicious environments that are attacking our systems and so forth. So starting in the top right with anomaly detection, right? It uses statistical profiling, understanding the baselines of our environments, understanding baselines of similar systems out in the wild, and also with the security teams, they have their own, red, blue, green type of team testing against the environment, and they sandbox different malicious code to understand how does that work, what does it change, how does it touch the system, so that that information can be built into the detection engines of the security tool set. With tying in with that is the behavioral analytics, where it looks for those patterns once it's been fed into the system to understand, is this a malicious activity or is this how the application actually works? Because a lot of it is around masking different processes to look like something legitimate, or changing things very subtly and very slowly versus very quickly to avoid detections, right? With the fusion, it's very important that we correlate events and alerts together to map that kill chain when we're trying to investigate an attack and the timeline. This is actually a really interesting feature where it has a graph to be able to show the chain of events of someone's credentials being compromised, their system being compromised, lateral movement within the environment, and so forth. With partners, similar to what we mentioned before, the intelligence built into the platform is not just from the Microsoft security teams, but they work with third-party partners all over the world and share that security data as well. So if there's something being detected in one part of the world that a third-party security team has discovered, and they share that with the Microsoft security team, they're able to put the detections, the behavioral analytics, and so forth into the platform so that as many people can be protected as possible to prevent it from happening if a patch is missing, for example, or add it into the security score to understand what people need to change in the environment to protect themselves. So that ties in, of course, with the threat intelligence, being able to leverage Microsoft's global threat intelligence across the world in partnership with third-party teams as well. So this is kind of where that kill chain piece comes into play, right? There's an attack that's been detected. How was it coming into the environment? Was it that brute force? Was it SQL injection? Was it DDoS? Was it intrusion on the network and so forth? Understanding how it came in what path, so that we can go back to that later and understand maybe we need to change some configuration to block that, or maybe we're need an update in a firmware or something so that we can protect ourselves future forward. And then what happened once that attack came in with the exploit that's occurring? Was there like in-memory components that were done, applied versus something on the system that's a literal file to detect, the processes that are being executed, how the movement within the environment happened, and where they go. So most of the time they compromise a low-level credential, compromise that system, and try to move laterally across the environment until they get to an administrator's system, try to compromise those credentials, elevate their permissions, and so forth. So understanding that chain of events and how that all related and how that went through helps in the root cause analysis, but also understanding where we might need to adjust our security, and obviously Microsoft can adjust the tool set to prevent that from happening, or at least alert when they see and detect that type of pattern happening again. And then with post-breach, knowing what's happened after the fact. So not only producing reports on the kill chain itself, but once our system's compromised, is there any data exfiltration? Is there something communicating to the outside world that's not supposed to? And is it communicating to a known malicious IP? Is it the dark net? Is it a botnet, right? Those type of perspectives to understand what, where it's going, what it's doing, why it's happening, so that as part of a post-mortem or root cause analysis report after the fact, we're able to leverage this kill chain data that's been correlated in the tool to be able to produce that for management, for security, CISOs, and so forth. So again, like we mentioned, when we have a lot of alerts and a lot of things happening, it can be overwhelming to understand where to focus first, especially if we have multiple high severity issues. How do you know which one is, SEV1 of SEV1 when you have more than one SEV1 issue? So with the critical threats and the prioritization of security alerts, the tool set helps us to understand where we want to focus first and why, and being able to immediately dive into that, to the kill chain, to see where it is in the pattern and the process into a single incident. So it's going to take a correlation of different events, compromised credentials, lateral movement, malicious processes, all of these which would be individual events in themselves in a security tool, and correlate them together into a security alert, an incident, to help us follow that pattern instead of trying to wade through many different alerts to figure out what's related. And so we have this insight is similar to what we talked about, where post-breach, if something is being exfiltrated, where is it going? Why is it going there? What's happening? So there's a really nice UI called the Threat Intelligence Map, which will actually show all the resources that are being attacked, which are the orange or yellowy looking colors, which is fine, because if it's on the public internet, then it's going to be, like I said, sniffed and scanned and attempted to be brute force. So we kind of expect that. But when it's red, that's when it's bad. Red means it's actually been successfully compromised and the system is sending data outside of the environment. So we see in the example here where it shows the malicious IP it's sending it to. We see the threat type is botnet, a confidence score specific based on Microsoft and third-party security teams assessing the IP itself and the where it's going, the country it's going to as well, where that IP is hosted. And there's also further details and also a report that you can produce out of this, which provides a lot of lower level details, say for security operations to report and dig into. So this is really helpful, and as like a daily check, for example, to be able to see on a dashboard that you can come in and you see, okay, is everything orange? Okay, that's expected, that's fine. If something's red, that needs immediate attention right away. And so this is an example of that kind of kill chain investigation path tool set, where it will show part of the investigation as you dig through things, what credentials were compromised, what system was compromised, how that was moved laterally across the environment, and then maybe credential privilege escalation and so forth. This is what helps you along that way in correlating the different alerts and events, instead of having to wade through all that data yourself in pulling it together into the single tool set. So it's very interactive. I don't unfortunately have an example of this because I don't have anything breached in my environment right now. But this is a really nice example. If you can find maybe a demo of it from Ignite that will show you how these link together, It's very dynamic in how it moves, and you can move through each system. If you click on a computer system there, it will provide additional details about that server and so forth. So it's a really nice way to wade through a lot of information as part of your deeper level security investigation. Okay, and finally, when we do have a threat, we need to respond quickly, right? So what happens if your organization is not operating in a 24/7 like, NOC or operations team, and there's a security event that happens in the middle of the night, say 2 o'clock in the morning? What happens? Well, either someone comes in the morning and deals with it, or someone gets called or woken up. So as part of that, if we think about that kind of play-by-play, even if we have a NOC or operations team that's 24/7, something's detected, they have a ticket, they see it's a security issue, maybe they can only go so far, then they pass it on to the security team, someone's paged, someone gets woken up, starts up your laptop, logs into the system and then reacts to it. So from the initial detection of that breach, let's say, to when the security person's able to react, that amount of time can vary depending on your organization and how your teams are structured. So we want to respond as quickly as possible. So another feature in Security Center is having another layer of automation integrated into the platform through logic apps, and they're called playbooks. And so basically what you can do is create an automated flow, a workflow, to react to a security condition. And it can automatically take actions in your behalf to help lessen the breach or whatever might be occurring and reduce that issue until a human being can actually look at it. So case in point, let's say we detect a specific system has been breached. Well, with an automated workflow, it can quarantine that system until someone from the security team can actually remote in, connect to the system, figure out what's happening, so that it mitigates any further spread of a breach in any way. So there's a lot of power in the integration for the workflows in the logic apps that we're able to leverage to shut that door as quickly as possible until a human being can do a little bit lower level detail analysis and investigation to react and make a final decision. But that way, at least when there's something going on, we're able to mitigate and minimize that footprint that might ideally allow us to not have a larger spread breach within the environment. So now let's watch a demonstration. Let's get out of the presentation and let's look at Security Center and go over a few points of this. And I'm just going to make sure I will put this over here. So as an example, here's with Security Center, we have our S.E.C.U.R.I.TY. This is something a little bit newer that Microsoft's released. And it's actually quite powerful because it's going to assess across multiple subscriptions. Like we said, we have the score specifically to that, and it's also by category. So maybe our team or part of our team is only responsible for the network, for example. We can dig into that and be able to pull up the information if the portal is going to work for me today. Let's go back and let's try that again. Okay, well, I'm going to give that a minute to load. In the network map, we're able to actually see where everything is interconnected to. And I'm not sure why it's not showing because it just did it before I got on the call. My apologies. Maybe I will just refresh this quickly. Okay, well, I'll come back to that. Maybe it needs a minute. So one nice thing that's been recently added is the regulatory compliance. This is in preview right now, where it will assess our environment against things like PCI, ISO, SOC, and Microsoft is adding a lot more to this. This is new, so they're just starting to add bits and pieces around this, but their goal is to add a lot more regulatory compliance checks against our environment so that we can be able to expand these and be able to see where we might need to refine to align to hit these regulatory needs and to say we're PCI compliant and so forth, and where we're good to go. And we can use this as part of our audit to be able to say for if a third-party audit team comes in, we can use this to produce a report to show where we are in our compliance goals and where we want to improve specifically. One thing I do want to call out from a real-world experience with Security Center is under the security policy here, all of the security data is going into a log analytics workspace because that's where all the log data is being held. But if we go into, say, our subscription settings, I want to talk briefly about the data collection because I've had a customer hit this in a not so favorable scenario, and I want to share this real world experience. So with it, here's the option where you can like auto provision any new systems that's deployed in Azure are able to be enabled into the solution and where the data is being kept. But what I want to focus on is the security events, specifically on the Windows side here. So we see we have control over the level of security data that will be collected in the environment. By default, when you enable Security Center, it is set to all events. And I want to call this out because if you look at the data collection documentation, if you're not sure which events you want to collect, there's a data tier, there's a data collection tier part in this document that shows all of the security events that are collected based on what level you are selecting in that option list. And the reason why I want to call it out is when you have it set to all events, if something happens like a breach, in my case for my customer, they had a security breach on a Sunday and it wasn't detected until a little bit later on in the week, say like a Thursday. And with all events enabled, the number of logs that were created as a result doubled very quickly, and even more so. And so it went from costing a certain amount of money every month for the use of Azure Security Center to like $7,000 because the sheer volume of data and everything that was being changed was quite large, and that can be a bit of like a sticker shock, so to speak, right? So the recommendation when you turn this on is to immediately come under the data collection and set this to common first. Review this article that lists all the security events that are captured based on selecting the common level, and get your security team to review this to make sure, does this capture everything that is required for your security controls and your security team's requirements? If it does, leave it at common. If not, then you can change it to all. So that's just something important I want to call out so that we don't get any crazy like $10,000 bills because something was detected, which is good, but then all that might be a bit of a financial issue. The other thing to call out is the security configurations. So by default, again, there's a configuration out of the box that Microsoft's provided, but we now have the ability to customize this. So if you download the file, it comes in a JSON format. So it's really, really long. We're not going to go through it all, but I just want to show you what it looks like. And here it shows this is the rule, this is where it's applied to, you know, what is the rule name, like what does it do, what is the CCE ID that it's in reference to, and so forth, and if it's enabled by default. So you can, if you need to make a modification based on your security team's requirements, you can export this, say this is what it has by default. They can review this information and then be able to make a modification and then go back and upload the file back into Security Center to make those changes, to make it custom. Let's just see if let's go down to recommendations for now. So then here is part of what we kind of showed in the screenshot, right, where it has recommendations based on like networking, compute, data, so forth, on what you might want to address sooner than later to give yourself a better security score in protecting your environment. So if you drill into each of these, so under compute, again, we have the breakdown for VMs and systems or app services or containers and so forth if we want to just focus on one area. And you can drill in to see and say, okay, this system has 3 high severity things we want to address. Here's the information. Okay, it's missing some updates. We don't have an NSG on the system, and it's missing some encryption. And so you can go in here, it gives you additional information. What is the impact to apply this recommendation? Implementation costs, like how long or how quickly it would take to implement this, and gives you additional details around that. And you can even hit take action and be able to, it'll move you right into the space to be able to apply that to that resource right away. I do want to touch on the security solutions, like we talked about third-party systems and other systems integrating into Security Center. We have our SIM system that we can pull in, our non-Azure, either on-prem or other clouds systems can be pulled in, firewall systems, you know, and that Ceph format. So you can go through and start pulling data into here in a central way. And then you can also take the data from Security Center and have that exported into your third-party SIM system as well. The adaptive tools, this is where we're talking about where it identifies what's running on the system, what's recommended based on the pattern. I don't have much here because these are just my domain controllers, and you can create these rules and customize that as needed. The just-in-time access, again, here I have a couple systems with this access applied. If I select it and hit request access, here's the way we can control, okay, I only have just-in-time enabled for port 3389. I want to turn this on to allow access. I want it to just to my IP directly or to a specific range, like within our private environment if it's a hybrid connection. And then what is our time range? So how long are we going to let this port be open? Maximum, say 3 hours, as low as 1 hour. So after that time, we will automatically lock the port down again. So it's not like you open it and then you forget, oh, I have to go back and remember to close it later. It automates that so that, again, we have a better security posture within the environment. File integrity monitor is something interesting. I don't maybe have too much data in here, but this is a neat feature. Be careful when you turn this on, because depending on what you're telling it to scan, if we go into the settings, you can tell it, watch these files, these registries, these files, or these directories specifically for file changes, including Linux, not just Windows, services, and content. And it can store file difference changes in a storage account so that you can go side by side. I don't know if I have an example of this. I check one of my systems here. Maybe I don't. But anyways, it will show, like, this is the file that was changed. It will show like a before and after side-by-side view so that you're able to identify as part of like a root cause what's happened in the environment, what files were modified, when and why and how. So this is a really nice feature, but be careful when you turn it on, especially for that recursive directory path, star.star. because it will start to ingest quite a lot of data. So maybe just start at a lower level directory, maybe specific to an application first to understand the pattern and how it operates, and then expand it from there. Security alerts, I don't think I have any security alerts in my environment because I don't have any breaches, sorry. It's actually very hard for a demo to obtain a security breach to be able to show. I think there's some ways Microsoft has scripted some examples to trigger those, but it's actually hard to trigger to be able to have something meaningful here. But I think they have a playbook that shows that. Security map, this is actually a newer version of the map that we had in the screenshot there, where I don't have anything detected, but it will show all of the different data points, where things are going, the data that's going out, where it's going, and that type of thing. And then the playbooks is in preview still, whereas that's the automation component where you can use logic apps to trigger different things. You can use logic apps to automatically create a ticket in your ITSM solution like ServiceNow or something like that. Email people, react to different things, and so forth. Let's just go back and just see. I want to see if my secure score is actually going to work for me now. Let's see if the topology. There we go. Let's just change this. So this is a new feature that the security team is kind of merging a little bit with the networking team, where it shows your subscriptions, the virtual networks that are there in another ring, your subnets within that, and what resources are connected where. And you're able to click on that to obtain additional information. Why is this like a high thing? Okay, we need to have a NSG on the subnet to protect traffic going in and out. What traffic is going in and out? If I maybe click on one of my DCs, it shows what ports are open, what ports are closed, and any additional information. So again, it makes it easy to drill into to help you investigate, to get a good idea of what's happening within your space. And with that, I believe that covers most of it. So if I go shift here, oops, flip that, and let me just quickly jump back to the deck. And so with that, I'm just going to wrap up and say thank you for everyone. Again, thank you for the user group to have me on. Again, this is my contact information if anyone wants to connect, to reach out. And I guess I will look at the chat if there's any other questions that either haven't been answered or anything else. I don't know if we're going to let people come off of mute, possibly, or if they have any other questions, put them in the chat, please.
Okay, Adin, Rohit here. So we will be taking the questions, and I have a few slides to show. So meanwhile, meanwhile the attendees can put their questions in Q&A panel, and then once I'm done, then you can take the questions.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Adin. That was a wonderful session. Hope everyone enjoyed it. And if you have any questions beyond the webinar, you can always write on our Facebook groups, our LinkedIn groups, and on our Telegram groups on mobile. SQLMaestros Learning Solution that I was mentioning earlier, we have the masterclasses that are going on. We have 3 more masterclasses remaining by Satya Ramesh and Amit Bansal on SQL Server. If you want to enroll, go ahead and register. Satya has already put down the link. That is SQLMaestros.com. We have the SQL Server Performance Tuning course by Amit Bansal. That is a very popular course, and now it is coming out in a video format. So go ahead and register already. It will be releasing by next month. So if you register now, there is a discount. So please do leverage that. We have hands-on labs. The best way to learn is to do it yourself, of course. So it is a concept that you can practice step by step. And since you're all DPG members, you can access it, some of the demos for free. We have the learning kits. You can have a look at that in our SQLMaestros website. And of course, if you have any thing to do with SQL Server health check, you can always write to us. This is the official website, and you can write to us at contact@SQLMaestros.com. So, like I mentioned, DPS 2019, that is Data Platform Summit 2019, dates are announced, and we have announced the pre-cons as well. So, if when you go to our website, that is dps10.com, such as put down the link. So please do click on that, and you will see a list of pre-cons that have already been announced. We have announced 13 pre-cons, and these pre-cons, as you can see, Peter Myers. The people who attended the conference would know him: Denny Cherry, Hamish Watson, Ginger Grant, of course, and Amit Bansal himself. So all of these are speakers, MCMs, MVPs from Microsoft and from all over the world, world-renowned speakers. So go ahead and register yourselves. Do spread the word, and if your company is interested, you can write to us. There are special discounts for that. And we are coming up with Data Platform Day, the free in-person events in Bangalore and Hyderabad once again. Our previous month, that is this month's Data Platform Days that happened in Bangalore and Hyderabad on Feb 2 and Feb 9th, where we launched DPS. It was a phenomenal success. We had more than 300 participants in the Bangalore event and more than 250 in the Hyderabad event. So we are following the same format, that is multi-track full-day event. We will have the tracks such as Azure Data Science, Business Intelligence, and Database Administration and Development in parallel sessions. So it's absolutely free. So go ahead and register yourselves. The website would be DataPlatformGeeks.com, and you can visit the events page in that and register yourselves. And see you at the event. So with that, I am done. And please do give your feedback about this webinar. Satya has put down the links to the LinkedIn and Facebook groups where you can comment, like, share, and give your comments about how you felt the webinar was executed or about the speaker. That would really help us going further. So once again, thanks a lot, and hope you have put down your questions for Adin to answer. So Adin, you can take over now.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. Maybe it helps if I come off mute. You guys can hear me, correct?
Yes, Adin, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So I do see that there's one question in there about using source control like TFS or Git for software development, and if there's any options to save code for elastic queries, and there's an example there. So in relation to like DevSecOps and stuff, yes, like you can use source control, even say for the customizations in Security Center as well, for like the policies and so forth. You're able to store that in like in a repository, like a source control repository, and be able to automate pushing that into Security Center through ARM templates or Terraform or other mechanisms. So with the example here about like creating a master key for encryption or database credentials, I don't know explicitly around that, unless you would maybe create them in Key Vault or some type of vaulting system and then programmatically refer to those. That can be a possibility as well. I've seen that be used for sensitive credentials around database as well. Hopefully that answers the question. If not, then please do feel free to elaborate a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, Adin. We don't see any more questions coming in. So if you have any questions, please put up your questions in our Facebook group and LinkedIn group. We'll forward that to Adin so that he'll respond to that questions as well. And thank you, Adin, for waking up so early and spend your time with our community. Thank you very much.
Yep, no problem. Thank you guys. Appreciate you having me.
Thanks, Adin. Have a good day.
You too.